In the mid-1960s, the Beatles stood at the pinnacle of their fame. For John Lennon, the band's founder and one of its principal songwriters, the weight of those expectations had begun to take a toll on his creativity and his sense of self. As he searched for meaning and direction amidst the chaos of Beatlemania, Lennon would find himself on a journey of introspection and self-discovery, a journey that would lead him to write one of the Beatles' most enduring and introspective songs.
He's a real nowhere man.
In the autumn of 1965, as Beatlemania swept over the entire world, John Lennon found himself in a state of deep introspection and isolation at his home in Weybridge, Surrey. The pressures of fame and the strain of a grueling recording and touring schedule had begun to take their toll. I'd spent 5 hours that morning trying to write a song that was meaningful and good, and I finally gave up and lay down, Lennon later recalled. In that moment of surrender, the words and music for Nowhere Man flowed out, capturing Lennon's feelings of disillusionment and directionlessness. Paul McCartney recognized the song represented a shift in Lennon's writing. I think it was about the state of his marriage, McCartney observed. It was in a period where he was a bit dissatisfied with what was going on. However, it led to a very good song. Indeed, the lyrics painted a portrait of a man sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody, a sentiment Lennon later admitted was somewhat autobiographical. As the crisp autumn air settled over London, the Beatles found themselves once again in the familiar confines of EMI Studios on Abbey Road. The band had already achieved an astonishing level of success, but they were not content to rest on their laurels. Instead, they were determined to push the boundaries of what was possible in popular music, both in terms of songwriting and sound. For their latest album, Rubber Soul, they had already begun to experiment with new instrumentation and recording techniques, crafting a sound that was more complex and sophisticated than anything they had done before. The Beatles began recording Nowhere Man on October 21, 1965, during the sessions for their groundbreaking album Rubber Soul. The song featured lush, three-part harmonies from Lennon, McCartney, and George Harrison, along with a jangly, trebly guitar sound that pushed the boundaries of what the studio equipment could handle at the time. Engineer Norman Smith was reluctant to boost the treble as much as Lennon wanted, but the band insisted. "We were always forcing them into things they didn't want to do," McCartney later said. "I remember we wanted very trebly guitars, which they are. They're among the most trebly guitars I've ever heard on record." Released later that December, the song marked a turning point not just for Lennon's songwriting, but for the Beatles' artistic evolution as a whole. The philosophical themes and introspective lyrics represented a clear departure from the simple love songs that had defined the band's early years. Music journalist Richie Unterberger described it as one of the first indications of the Beatles' increasing willingness to experiment with non-romantic subject matter in their songs. For Lennon, the writing of Nowhere Man had been an almost mystical experience, with the words and music arriving in a sudden burst of inspiration. But it also marked the beginning of a difficult period in his life, as he struggled with the pressures of fame and the deterioration of his marriage to Cynthia Lennon. In the years that followed, as the Beatles conquered new artistic frontiers and grappled with increasing personal and creative tensions, Lennon would continue to push the boundaries of what could be expressed in popular music, from the psychedelic imagery of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds to the raw confession of Cold Turkey. His songs reflected a restless creative spirit and a willingness to lay bare his deepest fears and desires. Yet, even as he evolved as an artist, Lennon never lost sight of the essential truth he had captured in Nowhere Man, the sense of isolation and disconnection that could afflict anyone, even a Beatle, at the height of his fame. Half a century after its release, Nowhere Man remains a touchstone of the band's catalog, a song that captures the restless spirit of its creator and the universal yearning for connection and meaning in a world that can often feel like nowhere land. Thank you for joining me today as we reflected on another amazing Beatles song. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more reliable rock and roll content like this.